Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of Primus Books, I would like to welcome you all to the launch of Professor Binay Bhushan Chaudhuri's The Hidden String, Agrarian Economy of Colonial Bengal and its Institutional Framework. Before you begin, allow me to say a few words about the author and the book. Professor Binay Bhushan Chaudhuri retired as professor at the University of Kolkata. He taught economic and social history at the university from 1960 to 1997. Across his decades-long career, he has also been visiting fellow at the University of Heidelberg, the University of Michigan, the University of California at Berkeley, School of Oriental and African Studies, and Kyoto University. His areas of expertise includes colonial Indian history with a particular geographical focus on Bengal. And over his long years of research, he has explored themes such as the commercialization of agriculture, the peasantry and agrarian relations, depeasantization and dispossession, and tribal movements and rebellions. The book is a remarkable study undertaken over 2.5 decades and revisited after a gap of 3 decades. At its core, the work elaborates 2 fundamental concepts: the nature of agricultural production and the institutional structure that governed it. This comprehensive study is therefore a testament to the complex interplay that shaped the economic landscape of rural Bengal from the 18th to the first half of the 20th century. Now, I would like to invite our panelists for today. Professor Arun Bandyopadhyay, Professor Smriti Kumar Sarkar, Professor Sanjukta Dasgupta, and Mr. Jawahar Sarkar to come up to the stage, please. Professor Binay Bhushan Chaudhuri's love for music is well known, and therefore we would like to mark the beginning of today's event with a Rabindra Sangeet performed by Ms. Mahua Chakraborty. Ma'am, can you please?
নমস্কার। এমন একটি গুণীজন সভায় আসতে পেরে আমি নিজেকে ধন্য মনে করছি। স্যারকে আমার প্রণাম। আমি আর বেশি সময় নেব না, আমি গানটা করছি। অধরা মাধুরী ধরেছি ছন্দ বন্ধনে, অধরা মাধুরী ধরেছি ছন্দ বন্ধনে, ও যে সুদূর প্রাতের পাখি গাহে সুদূর রাতের গান, অধরা মাধুরী ধরেছি ছন্দ বন্ধনে, বিগত বসন্তের অশোক রক্ত রাগে ওর রঙিন পাখা, বিগত বসন্তের অশোক রক্ত রাগে ওর রঙিন পাখা, দাড়ি ঝরা ফুলের গন্ধ ওর অন্তরে ঢাকা, অধরা মাধুরী ধরেছি ছন্দ বন্ধ
চিনি তোমারি দেশের আকাশ ও যে জানে তোমার রাতের তারা তোমারি দেশের আকাশ ও যে জানে তোমার রাতের তারা তোমারি বকুল বনের গানে যে উদয় সারা নাচে তোমারি কঙ্কনেরি তালে অধরা মাধুরী ধরেছি ছন্দ বন্ধনে অধরা মাধুরী ধরেছি ছন্দ বন্ধনে।
নমস্কার।
Thank you, ma'am. I would now request the Deputy Head of Primus Books, Dr. Prasun Chatterjee, to deliver the welcome address, please.
Good afternoon, honorable scholars on the dais and the distinguished audience present here today. I welcome you all on behalf of Primus Books on this extremely special occasion. I carry good wishes and regards for our author, Professor Binay Bhushan Chaudhuri, and all those present here on behalf of our Managing Director, Mr. Shugat Jain, our founder, Mr. B.N. Verma, who had initiated work on this prestigious book, Professor Arun Bandyopadhyay, who has shared his valuable suggestions to help in the publication of this extremely important work. As a part of the team and the editorial team at Primus Books, including Ms. Jyotika Mansata, who was the in-house editor, Mr. Shanmitra Ghosh and Mr. Bhaskar Ghoshal, who were key to communicating the work on the manuscript throughout the project, and our colleagues who worked tirelessly to publish this book in time for this event. At its inception, this book emerged several years back during the work on the comprehensive history of Bengal, when through a communication of Professor Arun Bandyopadhyay, Mr. B.N. Verma got in touch with Professor Binay Bhushan Chaudhuri to discuss the structure of what has now resulted in this prestigious book on agrarian economy, The Hidden String, and then brought it for publication to Primus Books after several rounds of discussion with the author. It was a wonderful journey and learning experience for all of us to observe the meticulous manner in which Professor Chaudhuri approached his work for the volume. The numerous drafts, the eye for detail, and the uncompromising effort towards perfection are qualities we have all gained from our interaction with Professor Chaudhuri in the last few years. I welcome you all to listen to the eminent panelists and the author himself to the journey of the making of this book, as well as the context of history writing and Professor Chaudhuri's scholarship, to situate this monumental work. Thank you.
Dr. Chatterjee will now felicitate Professor Chaudhuri. Allow me to introduce our panel for today's event. Our panelist, Professor Arun Bandyopadhyay, was Nurul Hasan Professor of History and Dean of Faculty Council for Postgraduate Studies in Arts, University of Calcutta. His research interests include agrarian history, history of science, environmental history, and institutional history. I would request Prasun Chatterjee to felicitate Professor Bandyopadhyay, please. Our next panelist, Professor Sanjukta Dasgupta, is Associate Professor of Indian History at the Department of Oriental Studies, Sapienza University of Rome, Italy. She has earlier served as an Associate Professor at the University of Calcutta. Her research interests include agrarian history and rural societies of India. Dr. Prasun Chatterjee will now felicitate Professor Dasgupta. Our next panelist, Professor Smriti Kumar Sharkar, was the Vice Chancellor of Bardhaman University and has also served as the Professor of History at Colonial University. His research interests include history of science, history of technology, and economic history. Dr. Chatterjee will now felicitate Professor Sharkar. We are fortunate to have with us on the panel today Mr. Jawahar Sarkar, who served as an IAS officer for 4 decades at both the center and in West Bengal. Mr. Sarkar has been India's longest serving culture secretary and then the CEO of Prasar Bharati that administers Akashvani and Doordarshan. Prasun sir, if you can please felicitate Dr. Sarkar. We are delighted to have with us the recordings from a really eminent panel of scholars today. Professor Irfan Habib, Professor Shekhar Bandyopadhyay, Professor David Laden, Professor Shomita Sen, and Professor Deepesh Chakraborty, who have shared their valuable insights on both the book and the author. Professor Suranjan Das and Professor Suparna Guptu could not be with us today as they had to go abroad due to some event that needed their urgent attention. Both Professor Das and Professor Guptu were students of Professor Chaudhuri and they have sent their regards for their respected teacher. Now, the moment has arrived. Let us unveil and release the book that has developed over a journey of 6 decades. I request the panelists to release the hidden string. Let us all stand up and applaud for this monumental work. Thank you. I would now request Professor Chaudhuri to say a few words on the book and on his journey.
Hello. I am grateful to the publisher for publishing my book. I hope all will like it.
Okay, thank you, sir. We shall now turn to the views expressed by Professor Irfan Habib. We have a video message with us.
Friends, I am very happy that I have this opportunity of welcoming the publication of The Hidden String by Binay Bhushan Chaudhuri, a very well-known economic historian. This book brings out the details of the agrarian economy of Bengal during the British colonial regime. As we know, it was in Bengal that the permanent settlement took place, which established the zamindari system in its full vigor, whatever area the permanent settlement extended. In the beginning, of course, the permanent settlement fell heavily on the revenue payers, but as time passed and prices rose, the permanent settlement became a welcome institution for the zamindars and was instrumental in the increasing exploitation of the peasantry. These things are well brought out in Binay Bhushan Chaudhuri's book, The Hidden Spring, Agrarian Economy of Colonial Bengal and its Institutions. Students and scholars alike would gain greatly from this book, which by its very size shows that a large amount of economic data has been included in the work, and its conclusions must be given full respect.
We sincerely thank Professor Habib for his time. We will now turn our vision to Professor David Ludden's message on the book and on the author.
Hello, this is David Ludden. I'm calling you from New York City, where I'm just recently retired from New York University, ever having worked here for 18 years or so. And then earlier than that, I was at the University of Pennsylvania. And then earlier than that, I did my PhD at the University of Pennsylvania. And all through all of that time, I have learned from Binay Chaudhuri, who is one of my favorite senior colleague gurus, one of the nicest, most generous, hardworking, brilliant, archivally dedicated, historically imaginative historians that I've ever known. It's been wonderful knowing Binay Chaudhuri over the years. I'm very glad that Arun and colleagues are arranging for this launch of this book in his honor. I had the honor of contributing to an earlier book in his honor, and hopefully there will be lots of books in his honor. He deserves all the honor that anybody can give him. I wish you all a wonderful time. Have a great launch. And here's my best regards and respect for Professor Binay Bhushan Chaudhuri forever and ever. Amen. Love you all. Take care. Bye.
We sincerely thank Professor Ludden too. I would now request Professor Arun Bandyopadhyay to say a few words on the making of the book. So if you can please come.
We just had heard the story of making the book, The Hidden String, from the author. Very few words he said, but we expected more from him. We thought that he will reminisce and he will make an autobiographical note of how the book, the idea of the book began even when he was in a remote village near Chattogram, 20 miles away from the town Chattogram, and then how it developed later on, along with the love of his studies, his love of music developed. All these things we thought that he will express, but somehow he did not today. So anyway, I cannot replace that autobiographical part where he was very subtle and he was also marked with his other passion of life, like music, etc., etc. And indeed did a panoramic view of it. I am not a replacement of that. I have also seen I have also seen how the book was made, first as a student and then as a colleague. It's a long drawn-out story. It covers considerable time, about 55 years, not 65 that the book took the time to write up, but 55 years. Later, I tried to recover from Binay Babu through my many conversations with him. Some of them is going on and some will come very soon. The part of the story that I did not know. I met Professor Chaudhuri sometimes in January 1970 in economic history class in MA first year at Calcutta University. In the same class, we met some legendary historians like Professor Oshin Dasgupta, Professor Sumit Sarkar, for a few months also Professor Borun De and of course Professor Amoles Tripathi. Now it was also a time when I came to Calcutta for studies from my Mofussil town. So very soon I became familiar with his agrarian history classes simultaneously on India and Bengal. His very serious mode of teaching. I was realized here we are exposed to a sort of teaching based on concomitant first-hand research on the subject. I also came to know he has done 2 doctoral dissertations, both on agrarian history of Bengal, one from Calcutta University way back in 1958, and the other, at that time recently, from Oxford University in 1968. He did not publish any of them, then and even now. However, he had published a book, Growth of Commercial Agriculture in Bengal, Volume 1, which I was very glad to see that some of the students actually took the book to him and to get his signature on the book. I went to Bhavanipur, actually the house of his brother-in-law, Professor Devi Prasad Chattopadhyay, office of the past and present, the paper, to purchase the book. Sometimes in February, March 1970, and got a copy of it. I found it was published in the year 1964, just before Binay Babu leaving for Oxford with a Commonwealth Fellowship. Going through the book, I found an interesting footnote where Binay Babu referred to his forthcoming book, The Agrarian History of Bengal. I later even asked him when it will be published. He smiled. I then did not understand what he meant by that smile. In 1971, in our MA second year, Binay Babu left for teaching, study and research to Heidelberg University by a special invitation of Professor Dietmar Rothermund. The next year, Professor Oshin Dasgupta also went in the same place. Binay Babu spent a full year there, only to return back in 1972. By that time, I was familiar with some of his articles published in Indian Economic and Social History Review, for which I had been a personal subscriber at that time. I was preparing for the MA examination, and my result was out in 1973, and I started my own search for agrarian history of South India under his supervision in 1974. But my interest in what Professor Chaudhuri was doing with his proposed agrarian history of Bengal did not end there. In the meanwhile, I was exposed to research on agrarian history of such stalwarts such as Barton Stein and Robert Frickenbach, both of whom were familiar with Professor Chaudhuri's work, and both of whom assured me of the best supervision that I was getting then from Professor Chaudhuri. Binay Babu. Indeed, David Laden, Christopher Baker, Nicholas Darks worked together in Tamil Nadu archives when I was there, and later I was exposed to David Ward's book also. On the whole, it was the 1970s and early 1980s. Binay Babu was most productive during this period as far as studies in various aspects of agrarian history of Bengal was concerned. Particularly his Heidelberg days, the first phase, because the second phase he went again in the, I think, late 1970s, but I particularly indicate the first phase, that is to say, the whole of 1971. The first phase, his Heidelberg days, was the most productive because presumably he was actually planning what he will do in the 1970s all throughout. It was during this time that Professor Dharma Kumar actually was also preparing for the Cambridge Economic History of India, Volume 2, and he invited him to write 2 chapters. And Dharma knew that Professor Chaudhuri used to write very long articles, so she actually particularly told him that it should be about 50 pages each, these chapters. So Professor Chaudhuri sent those 2 chapters, and then Dharma told me this story. Then she questioned some of those formulations. And then Professor Chaudhuri sent 2 500-page book as the supporting evidence of these 2 chapters. And when Dharma Kumar asked him that why did he send these 2 books, two unpublished books, then he said, how can I write up if I do not know the whole? How can I sum up if I do not know the whole? So that was Professor Chaudhuri. We all were closely following what Binay Babu was writing in the 1970s and early 1980s. Sometimes in the 1980s, David Ludden declared publicly in one of his articles that Professor B.B. Chaudhuri was a rare historian of modern India who did not change his attention from agrarian history and remained engaged with it for several decades. He also did not know at that time that after 6.5 decades, this book will be published. By this time, about 12 long articles of Chaudhuri were published in Bengal Past and Present, Indian Economic and Social History Review, and Indian Historical Review, which was the journal of the Indian Council of Historical Research. His teacher, Professor N.K. Sinha, had already passed away in 1974. I heard from one of my teachers who was close to Professor Sinha that Professor Sinha lamenting in the early 1970s that Binay is so fastidious to his work as not to publish his dissertations. If Sinha was alive in the mid-1980s, he might probably change his statement. The Dutch historian William van Sendel, who was also a historian of Bengal, told me once that Chaudhuri's articles on agrarian Bengal were not only original, but each of them could be an independent book, a monograph in itself. But Professor Chaudhuri did not publish these articles even after 25 years when they were thought and written. Because all of these actually were finally written by 1985. But this is only 2025. He did not publish his 2 dissertations as well. Even now, if I ask this question to Sir, he may probably smile. Indeed, actually, his Oxford dissertation was unpublished, and when a Bengali book was prepared in his name, I translated those essays. One of the chapters of his Oxford dissertation, which was unpublished in English, was first published in Bengali translation. But we have seen, after 30 years of those writings, he thought of a revision, some alteration, and a re-engagement with the subject. And the result is the publication of The Hidden String. This is not a place of making a critical appreciation of the entire work, covering 911 pages. It is important to note that he has taken several characters, such as Jamindars, peasants, landless laborers, agrarian society, and government in the respective institutional framework, and has made a detailed and analytical scrutiny of each of them. None of them is a monolithic entity according to him. The Jamindars and others also, monolithic entity, unchanging over the years. I shall particularly draw your attention to two articles, one on land market and another on rural power structure, respectively published in the mid-1970s and mid-1980s. His teacher, Professor Sinha, in his third volume of Economic History of Bengal, stated that Prince Dwarkanath Tagore was saved even after the commercial crisis of Bengal in the year 1846-47, simply because he had landed Jomindari property extensively in Bengal, which then turned into very profitable by the middle of the 19th century. Binay Babu made an original and extensive study of Jomindari property from the late 18th to the early 20th century, showing both statistically as well as socially the vicissitudes of the Jomindari land market. This is a very interesting thing because actually in the most of the left and general thinking, the Jamindars were always stated something as a monolithic thing, always exposing and exploiting people, and they were never always in a good position, never in a bad position, but that account doesn't show that. Similarly, in the late 1970s and 1980s, Binay Babu was seriously engaged in a debate about the structural change in Bengali agrarian society. There was also a prolonged debate, first in the pages of Economic Weekly in the 1950s and early 1960s, and then in the Economic and Political Weekly later on, about the feudal and the semi-feudal character of Indian agriculture. As a corollary to this debate, there developed a historical question regarding the agrarian control of Jotdars and Jomindars in Bengali society, and Binay Babu took a very particular position here, where there might occur significant, where he argued that there might occur significant changes in society even when they were not structural. He never remained an advocate of changeless agrarian society in Bengal, as some radical political thinkers made us to believe in the 1970s and early 1980s. I have seen Binay Babu at the time of writing some of these seminal essays. He was very restless, often saying that he has no time to die. Morbar shomoy nei amar. He was used to say. He did not, but did he remain silent after writing these essays for about 30 years? It is apparently a mystery. One answer is that he became engaged with a new study of tribal world for the next 25 years, for which Sangyupta was a great witness. But that may not be all the story. When he took up agrarian study again, he re-engaged and wrote a 66-page new introduction in this book that is just released, and a 40-page conclusion. Was he searching something anew throughout these years? Searching something from his boyhood days to the days of his youthful research here and elsewhere? Something that he got in his 90s, now he's 93, in his 90s with the publication of this book. He himself declared that the book is not a collection of stray papers, but there is something which may be called the hidden spring of the entire work. Hidden string of the entire work. He said not stray papers, but did he mean that he was somehow aware of the connecting link from the very beginning? Let us now believe that he has got it in his subtle explication of the institutional framework of agrarian change in colonial Bengal. It was, of course, an academic journey as well as an emotional journey to the unknown, following it over 6 decades and a half through his multiple searches in the realm of knowledge in India and abroad, finally reaching a kind of an ecstasy of finding something worthwhile, just as the opening song indicated, an Adhura Madhuri, setting in with the kind of a pattern which the author finally discovers and tells us as Dhurechi Chanda Bandhane. Whatever it may be, I love to imagine that the hidden string is also a kind of a song a song of an extraordinary attainment that comes out of a legendary historian who is also a lover of music as well as a song of lifetime. My pranam to sir.
Thank you, Professor Bandyopadhyay. We shall now hear the video recorded message of Professor Shekhar Bandyopadhyay.
Thank you for inviting me to speak on this occasion. I wish I could be there in person. It is indeed a privilege for me to be able to speak at the book launch program for a book written by someone from whom I received my first lessons in the economic history of India. I was a direct student of Professor Chaudhuri at Calcutta University, and I still distinctly remember his classes at the Darbhanga Building Galleries in the College Street campus, and that was exactly 50 years ago, the mid-1970s, when Eric Stokes announced the return of the peasant to South Asian history. And Professor Chaudhuri belonged to that generation of historians who situated the peasants at the center stage of the history of modern India in particular and global history in general. If we had to read Eric Stokes for the history of peasants in North and Northwestern India, for Eastern India and Bengal more particularly, the standard texts were the writings of N.K. Sinha and his able disciple Binay Bhushan Chaudhuri. We began to read his essays on agrarian relations in general, on commercialization of agriculture, depeasantization, movement of rent, as well as peasant and Adivasi movements in various journals. It is indeed a privilege for us that this book brings all these articles together in a substantially revised form. Later on, of course, I read his chapters in the Cambridge Economic History of India, and finally, just a few years ago, I read very carefully his magnum opus, Peasant History of Late Pre-Colonial and Colonial India. Indeed, I feel one cannot understand peasant history in Eastern India without reading Binay Bhushan Chaudhuri. He has written extensively on the economic variables affecting agriculture and its social framework. The variables include land and labor, while the social framework includes the network of relationships within which the peasant worked, and of course the state that in many ways affected the world in which he lived and toiled. Professor Chaudhuri defines peasant in a very broad way, and not in a cultural anthropological sense, not just as owner-cultivator, but as anyone having a relationship with the process of agricultural production, including the agricultural laborers. He has looked at peasant history with a nuanced focus on the wider political and economic system. And this is where the writings become indispensable for understanding not only the agrarian relations, but the entire social world of the Bengali peasant. I have no hesitation to acknowledge that his lectures and writings largely inspired me to look at the history of a peasant community in eastern Bengal. For my current project on the social history of the Bengal famine of 1943, I reread many of his writings and realize once again that without reading Professor Chaudhuri's writings, one cannot understand the peasant society. It helped me to understand the past famines as well as the trends in agricultural productivity over the past years, which culminated in the famine of 1943-44. So, what the point I wanted to emphasize is that the starting point for understanding the Bengal peasant history is the writings of Binay Bhushan Chaudhuri. I have read practically all his writings, and I'm going to read this book as well with interest, as I understand some of these old essays have been substantially revised in this present volume. I would also like to take this opportunity to express my personal gratitude to this stalwart scholar and teacher who stands before us as a role model. He has shown us that relentless pursuit of knowledge without caring for any position of power can be a meaningful purpose of life. If we can carry on this tradition, the academia will be a much better place. Sir, amar pranam neben, bhalo thakben.
I would now request Professor Sanjukta Dasgupta to say a few words on the book and also to share her experiences as a student of economic history in Professor Chaudhuri's class. Ma'am, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. In fact, I'm deeply honored to be here today and to have this opportunity to participate in this event. We have been looking forward to this book for a long time, and while it's announced that I will be discussing the book, I really don't think I have the competence to assess Sir's contribution to the discipline. He is the doyen of Agrarian history of Bengal. So I will really talk about my experience as a student of Professor Chaudhuri. I read economic history with Sir, my special paper in the late 1980s, 1987 to 89 if I remember. Then I also did my MPhil and my PhD under his supervision. And I was introduced to Adivasi history by Professor Chaudhuri. My own research looked at some aspects of the socio-economic transition of the Ho community, and in fact my understanding and knowledge of Adivasi society had been deeply shaped by his own ideas regarding Adivasi society, economy, and also the Adivasi movements. Sir taught us economic history of Bengal and industrial revolution, some lectures on industrial revolution, a paper that he shared with Professor Hari Vasudevan. And also I did the special paper of economic history, and I followed this up with a course on writing peasant history as part of the MPhil coursework. Now, all of these were very complex subjects, and which were not really very easy for students in our undergraduate system to grapple with. But what I really remember that we were introduced to a host of very sophisticated theories, very new terminologies, but with a lucidity and a simplicity which made it very easy for all of us to understand. And another thing that I remember particularly is that there were, of course, the problem of language, with many students not being so conversant in English, and during our times the lectures were delivered in English. But Sir's teaching was such that it was so lucid and so clear that even students who were not very well versed in English had absolutely no difficulty in following his lectures. So, and BBC, as we used to always affectionately refer to him. So it's not just the students who were not conversant with English, but even the most laggard students could follow his lectures with ease. And if you attend his classes, you more or less have it, drilled into your heads. Now, so as an economic historian focused on agriculture, Sir's economic history was the kind that focused on history rather than only on economic statistics, but of course there was that rich empirical evidence always informing his work. And another thing that I remember is that somehow these lectures on industrial revolution of Europe and also economic history of Bengal and economic history of India, these were indeed very interrelated. And he would draw from this range of ideas and debates concerning the discipline of economic history of Europe. And we see these, even as students, we could make out those interconnections between the two, all the different topics that we would study. Of course, while Sir took his own position, based himself firmly on archival study of economic themes, as master students, we did not have the opportunity to dig into the archives. Our coursework left us with very little time and opportunity to do so. But Sir had a specific way of making us read. So we would be examined or questioned on the text itself. So we were encouraged to read entire texts, entire sections of books. And as a result, we developed that understanding of how to read the archives, how to interpret the archives, how to analyze, how other historians have critically analyzed archival documents. The lectures which left us mesmerized and which I remember the most were those on the permanent settlement of Bengal. And in fact, I remember clearly, these lectures continued over 2 months. And they were absolutely amazing, these lectures. All of us would be present on those days. So we had this huge class of 120 students, and I still remember at least 100 students would be present. These were remarkable lectures. And I also remember that when he was teaching us the intellectual origins of the permanent settlement, we were of course expected to read Ranajit Guho's The Rule of Property, but these lectures were entirely original lectures. These were not simply culling data from Ranajit Guho. In fact, when we read Ranajit Guho, we realized how much he differed. Sir's position, in fact, differed from Ranajit Guho. This is not something that he would introduce himself directly, but these were just amazing lectures, especially when he was talking about the ideas of Alexander Dow, Henry Patullo, Philip Francis on the nature of land proprietorship and tenancy rights in Bengal. So, so his lectures were never just a review of the excellent research, but went on to being original documents in themselves, original essays and articles, and which, as Orinda just pointed out, makes me wonder why it is not published as an original paper. These were really, really amazing. In economic history, the broad outline of the themes that he taught us, there were actually 2 major areas. One was on the general impact of British colonial rule, where we looked at issues like famines, etc., and also on the debates of the nature of the British impact. So, in which we would read the nationalist arguments of, for example, Daniel and Alice Thorner, among others, as well as what was then the current theories in the late 1980s regarding the frustration of Europe to make much of an inroad into the Indian economy, particularly the works of Christopher Bailey. But the main thrust of the economic history lectures were what the book deals with now, and that is the rural relationships, particularly focusing on peasant stratification, agrarian labor, cash crop cultivation, the rise of the rich peasantry in colonial India, also depeasantization. But one thing which always struck me is that while we would read all these different new research of the times, Sir did not always introduce his own articles directly. So we would actually get his ideas, his understandings, his arguments through reading our lecture notes. It is in the class where he introduced many of his ideas, which when we later followed up by reading the articles, we could see how much of it was there. So this is also a very interesting thing that I see, that there was an unusual reticence on his part to introduce himself directly into his lectures. Also, of course, beyond this theme, Sir was also deeply interested in the way the countryside was approached in European historiography, and how this also informed his work on India. And in our MPhil classes particularly, he introduced us deeply into the world of the peasant, and not just the Indian peasantry, but giving us a broad theoretical outlook on the peasantry in Europe, starting from Marc Bloch right down to the long-term evolution of French rural society, as well as the works of Shanin, Janov, and others, the works on the Russian peasantry, besides a very critical reading of Ranajit Guha's elementary aspects of peasant insurgency. And another thing that I really remember about the classes, and when I had just read the introduction to the volume, though some of the essays, we are familiar with it, but I have not had the time to go through these essays to see how these have been revised. But I'm really struck by the introduction where Sir has introduced all the contemporary works on Bengal rural society. And again, what I really remember is how scrupulously analytical he had been. He had always been, and he tended to avoid the world of anecdote, though sometimes he did much later in our MPhil classes give us some of his stories, but more during my PhD discussions relate stories of his own experience with the world of the peasantry. And of course, Sir is noted for avoiding rhetorical demonstrativeness, and he insisted on correct absorption and understanding of frameworks. He insisted on systematic reading, and what is notable is that he regularly updated the literature every year and regularly reworked his lectures. There was no rehashing, so we couldn't get by going to our seniors and asking for their notes and references. We had to read for ourselves. So for our exams, we had to work on our essays, read ourselves. And this is indeed one of the most valuable lessons, that the importance of which I today realize now that I am a teacher myself. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. We shall now hear the recorded message that Professor Dipesh Chakraborty has sent us. Can we have the lights off, please?
Namaskar. I am Dipesh Chakraborty. I feel honored to have been invited to make a few remarks on this occasion of the launch of Professor Binay Bhushan Chaudhuri's book, The Hidden Spring. The essays collected in this book represent the work of a lifetime of a scholar whose knowledge of the history of the agrarian economy of colonial Bengal is simply unrivaled. Future and present historians will all be in his and his publisher's debt for putting together and bringing out this collection. This occasion also gives us an opportunity to celebrate Professor Chaudhuri himself. Our names, as the great Sharat Chandra Chattopadhyay once remarked, often mock us. But Binay Babu's name doesn't. Binay is genuinely the Bhushan of this great scholar. I offer him my respectful pranam and my warmest congratulations.
Our sincere thanks to Professor Chakraborty. I would now request Professor Smriti Kumar Sarkar to say a few words on the author.
নমস্কার সকলকে নমস্কার। আমার গুরু অধ্যাপক বিনয় ভূষণ চৌধুরী কিভাবে এখানে যে আলোচনা হলো তা থেকে একটু অন্য দিকটায় আমি বলি, কিভাবে উনি আমাকে পরিবর্তন করে দিলেন। আজ থেকে 52 বছর আগে এই গোলপার্কে এক সন্ধ্যায় স্যারের যে রূপ দেখেছিলাম আজও আমার মধ্যে সেই এখনো দীপ্যমান আছে। 52 বছরের আগের সন্ধ্যা, লোডশেডিং। আমি তখন স্যার এদিকের বাড়িটায় থাকতেন। আমি দরজায় কড়া নাড়তে স্যার এক হাতে আলো নিয়ে খুলে দিলেন দরজা। সমস্ত আলোতে তার মুখটা উদ্ভাসিত অন্ধকারের মধ্যে। সেই যে পরিচয় হলো স্যারের সঙ্গে, উনি আমাকে ডেকেছিলেন বাড়িতে। আমরা ইকোনমিক হিস্ট্রির মাত্র 3 জন ছাত্রছাত্রী ছিলাম সে বছর। একজন চলে গেলে আমরা 2 জন মাত্র ছিলাম। আমাদের 2 জনকে উনি পরিচিত হওয়ার জন্য ডেকেছিলেন। আমি বেলঘড়িয়ায় থাকতাম। সেই যে যাত্রা শুরু হলো, আমি স্যারের কাছে বহুবার এসেছি, বিভিন্নভাবে এসেছি। আমার কথা বলার মূল কারণ হচ্ছে যে আমাদের মতো ছেলে, আমি একেবারেই রিফিউজি পরিবারের অত্যন্ত সাধারণ এক ছাত্র ছিলাম। কিভাবে উনি আমার সমস্ত জীবনকে পরিবর্তন করে দিলেন, শুধু আমাকে কেন, আমি জাস্ট একটা উদাহরণ আমি সে কথা বলছি। স্যারের 1000 ছাত্রকে তিনি শিখিয়েছেন। মধ্যযুগের এক বাঙালি কবি বলেছিলেন, পিতামাতা জন্ম দিলেন, গুরু দিলেন গুণ, আলোনা ব্যঞ্জনেতে জুড়ে দিলেন নুন। সত্যি তাই। অধ্যাপক বিনয় ভূষণ চৌধুরীর মধ্যে মানুষ গড়ার এমন একটা কৌশল ছিল, তার একটা সর্বজনীন দৃষ্টি ছিল। তিনি পড়াশোনার বিষয়টায় আমি একটুখানি আসছি, কিভাবে আমার মতন একজন প্রান্তিক ছাত্রকে, অত্যন্ত সাধারণ স্কুল, অত্যন্ত সাধারণ কলেজ থেকে আমি এসেছি। তখন একটু আগে সংযুক্তা যে কথাটা বলল তার রেই ধরে বলি, ইংরেজিতে কথা বলতে গেলে আমাদের তখন সাবজেক্ট প্রেডিকেট সব বল্গাহীন অশ্বের মতো ছুটে চলে যেত। উনি ওনার নিজের গুণে আমাকে তো শুধু একা নয়, বছরের পর বছর আমি অনেককে জানি, তাদেরকে তিনি ধরিয়ে দিয়েছিলেন। আমি চিরকালের বিশৃঙ্খল, আমার মধ্যে কোনো শৃঙ্খলা কোনো কালেই ছিল না। উনি আমাকে এমন একটা বিষয়ে কত চর্চা, কত কথা। একদিন বললেন, দেখো, ইকোনমিক হিস্ট্রির আনঅর্গানাইজ সেক্টর নিয়ে কেউ কখনো কিছু করেনি। অত্যন্ত পরিশ্রম করতে হয়, আর্কাইভসে কিচ্ছু পাওয়া যায় না, তোমাকে খুঁজে নিতে হবে। কি করবে তুমি দেখো, যদি পরিশ্রম করতে পারো তাহলে দাঁড়াবে। আর ওনার কাছে সংযুক্তা বলছিল, শিল্প বিপ্লব পড়ে এমন ভালো লেগেছিল ইন্ডাস্ট্রিয়াল রেভলিউশন। স্যারের আর একটা গুণ ছিল কি, মানে আপনারা সবাই জানেন, এখানে যারা আছেন তারাও জানেন, যে শুধু তো পড়াতেন না, উনি বই ধরিয়ে দিতেন। নিজের পার্সোনাল কালেকশন থেকে সবচাইতে উপযোগী বইটা উনি ধরিয়ে দিয়েছেন। কতদিন তার বই নিয়ে পড়েছি। এখনও আমি তার বই থেকে যে সমস্ত জেরক্স করেছিলাম, ওপরে লেখা আছে, স্যারের কাছ থেকে পেয়েছি, আমার বাড়িতে গেলে দেখবেন কতভাবে উনি আমাকে সাহায্য করেছেন। আমি যে সময়কার কথা বলছি, সেই সময়ে আমার শরীরী কাঠামো এত খারাপ ছিল, একটা খাঁচার মতন আর কি। স্যার আমাকে একদিন বললেন যে তোমার চেহারা এত খারাপ কেন, তুমি ব্যায়াম করতে পারো না, তুমি সকালবেলায় খাবে আর ব্যায়াম করবে। এই ছিল হচ্ছে স্যারের একটা সার্বজনীন দৃষ্টি। সমস্ত দিক থেকে, লেখাপড়া তো বটেই, সমস্ত দিক থেকে তিনি সমস্ত দিকে তার একটা নজর থাকতো। আমরা তার মধ্যে যে জিনিস পেয়েছি তার কোনোভাবেই তার কোনো তুলনা করা চলে না। মধ্যযুগে কবির একটা খুব সুন্দর কথা বলেছিলেন। কবির বলেছিলেন, ইয়ে তন বিষ কি বেলারি, গুরু অমৃত কে খান। আমার এই শরীর এত বিষের ভাণ্ড, কিন্তু গুরু হচ্ছেন অমৃতের ভাণ্ডার, অমৃতের খনি। গুরুর কাছ থেকে যদি এক ছোঁয়া অমৃত আমি পেতে পারি, তাহলেই আমার জীবন ধন্য হতে পারে। আমার জীবন বাস্তবে কি এমনভাবে পরিবর্তন করে দিয়েছেন আমার পরম শ্রদ্ধেয় অধ্যাপক বিনয় ভূষণ চৌধুরী। বহু জন্মের ভাগ্যে আমি আমার এই রকম অধ্যাপক পেয়েছিলাম। ইকোনমিক হিস্ট্রি নিয়েছিলাম। কি ইকোনমিক হিস্ট্রি জানতাম না। ইকোনমিক হিস্ট্রি নিয়েছিলাম কেন? যারা এখানে পুরনো ছাত্রছাত্রীর অরুণদাদের মনে আছে, সেই সময় একটা খাতা রাখা থাকতো, সেই খাতায় নাম লিখে জানাতে হতো কোন বিষয় নিয়ে পড়বে। আমার মা একটা ভালো কথা বলেছিলেন, তুই এত দুর্বল শরীর নিয়ে কলকাতায় পড়তে যাচ্ছিস, ভিড়ের মধ্যে যাবি না। তা আমি দেখলাম যে ইকোনমিক হিস্ট্রিতে খুব সবচাইতে কম ছেলে পেলে নাম লিখেছে, মাত্র 3টে নাম আছে, 2টো নাম আছে। আমি 3য় নামটা লিখে দিলাম। মার্জিনে থাকতে আমার সবসময় ভালো লাগে। তা আমি এই যে 3জন হলাম, প্রথম ক্লাস অমলেশবাবুর, তখন অমলেশবাবু বিভাগীয় প্রধান, তার ওই ছোটো ঘরটায় ক্লাস হতো। আমাদের সঙ্গে আমার দেখা দেখি মেদিনীপুরের সুবল ভৌমিক বলে একজন, সেও ইকোনমিক হিস্ট্রি নিয়েছিল। সে আমার দোসর ছিল, কিন্তু অমলেশবাবুর প্রথম ক্লাসটা করার পর থেকে তাকে আর রক্ষা করতে পারিনি। সে যে কোথায় চলে গেল, ইকোনমিক হিস্ট্রি আর হলো না, আমরা 2জন টিকে গেলাম। তো এই ইকোনমিক হিস্ট্রি তো অনেক দিকপাল মানুষজনের কাছে পড়েছি আমরা, পরবর্তীকালে আরও বহু মানুষের সঙ্গে আলাপ হয়েছে। কিন্তু স্যার, আমার গুরুদেব, আমার সমস্ত কিছু, মানে আমি একটা কথা বারবার মনে আসে যে যদি তাঁর সঙ্গে আমার দেখা না হতো তাহলে আমি কি করতাম, কোথায় চলে যেতাম। আমার মনে আছে এমএ পরীক্ষা দেওয়ার পরপরই আমি একটা ব্যাংকে কেরানির চাকরিতে ঢুকেছিলাম সাংসারিক প্রয়োজনে। স্যারকে জিজ্ঞেস করলাম, স্যার পড়াশোনা ছেড়ে এটাই যাব? স্যার বললেন, হ্যাঁ এখনই যাও, পরে কিছু একটা নিশ্চয়ই পাওয়া যাবে। এই হচ্ছেন। তারপর থেকে স্যারের সঙ্গে বহু ঘুরেছি, বহু আলাপ আলোচনা হয়েছে, বহু একাডেমিক ডিসকাশন হয়েছে। সেই সমস্ত বিষয় নিয়ে আমি যাচ্ছি না। আমি ছোট্ট একটা কথা বলে শেষ করব। আবার সেই কবিরের কথা বলি। কবির বলছেন, গুরু গোবিন্দ দোনো খড়ে। একদিকে গুরু দাঁড়িয়ে আছেন, আর একদিকে গোবিন্দজিও দাঁড়িয়ে আছেন। কাকে লাগু পায়, আমি কার পায়ে প্রণাম করব? বলিহারি গুরু আপকি গোবিন্দ জিউ মিলায়। গুরুজি, আপনার কোনো তুলনা হয় না, আপনার জন্যই আমার গোবিন্দ লাভ হয়েছে, সুতরাং আমি আপনাকে প্রণাম করি।
Thank you, Professor Sarkar. We shall now hear the recorded message that Professor Shomita Sen has sent us.
Let me begin by welcoming this collection of essays by Professor Binay Chaudhuri, which has been titled The Hidden String. The book, as the blurb tells us, is a collection of articles written over several decades. I should say that the last of these essays were written in the mid-1980s, at a time when I was in his classroom taking a special paper in economic history. So I presume that some of these essays were written alongside his teaching in class. So we probably derived great benefit from his writing of these essays at that time. And I have to say that our experience of being taught by Professor Chaudhuri in the special paper on economic history was often profoundly transformative. And I still have vivid memories of those classes and retain some of the knowledge and analysis that we were taught at that many years ago. I should perhaps also say that my own research diverged from Professor Chaudhuri's main interests. His interests have always been more in the rural and agricultural sectors, whereas I have taken the opposite aspect of India's economy. I've done more work on urban and industrial India. I have also been a little different in that I have done a lot of interdisciplinary work looking at contemporary issues as well. In all my work, however, I have had to engage. You cannot work, do any social history of India without engaging with India's agricultural context and the colonial history of rural relations, agricultural economy. So even while my work was on gender, my work was on urban, industrial India, I nevertheless had to engage with Professor Chaudhuri's work at every stage of my research career. And indeed, I would attribute the fact that my book on the jute industry has a chapter on Bengal's agrarian economy to the fundamental, profound influence of his work on all his students, including me. I should also perhaps mention that since I work on gender, a lot of the kind of approach I take, especially to the impact of colonialism, has similarity with how Professor Chaudhuri outlines his engagement with the impact of colonialism in the introduction to this volume of essays, which is to take a more nuanced approach instead of taking either the extreme view of everything that was happening in the 19th and early 20th century has to be attributed to the colonialism, or taking the view that indigenous economies and societies marched alongside colonialism without suffering much impact of it. I think both these views fail to explain a great deal about Indian economy and society in that period. And it is very clear the kind of approach Professor Chaudhuri takes, that in some aspects colonial rule had greater impact than in other aspects, is very clear if one looks at gender. colonial rulers did not invent gender relations, but they had deep and abiding impact on it. So one has to look at the braiding of indigenous and colonial in order to understand gender in India in the colonial period. And that really follows very much the path the argument that Professor Chaudhuri outlines in the introduction to this book. And of course, he looks at institutions very closely, including credit and other such institutions, which have more complicated histories many of these institutional issues, local governance, for instance, also are issues that I have to engage with in my work. So I'm looking forward, once the book is in our hands, to reprising these essays that Professor Chaudhuri has written over such a long period of time. I should also say that in the essay, the volume that was published in 2018, edited by Professor Arun Bandyopadhyay and Shamjukta Dasgupta, in honor of Professor Chaudhuri, I wrote an essay on domestic workers, particularly women domestic workers and the feminization of domestic workers in that volume. I hope that that contribution that Professor Chaudhuri liked that contribution. And I hope that we will continue to engage. I will continue certainly to engage with Professor Chaudhuri's work in the years to come. And thank you, Professor Chaudhuri, for all that you've done for us.
Our sincere thanks to Professor Sen for her kind words. I would now request Mr. Jawahar Sarkar to say a few words on the author. Sir, please.
Most respected Professor Binay Bhushan Chaudhuri, it's indeed a pleasure to see you on this stage at this age. আমি বাংলায় বলতে ভালোবাসতাম, কিন্তু আমাকে পরে বলা হলো যে বোধহয় ইংরেজিটাই ওই অরুণদা মাথা নাচ্ছেন। বাংলায় বললে আমি প্রথমে শুরু করতাম, আমার স্ত্রী জিজ্ঞেস করছিল এত শিক্ষিত লোকের মাঝে তুমি কি করতে যাচ্ছ, তার উত্তর আমি ঠিক সময় মতন দেব। You see, you have heard a lot of historians and scholars, and I can see many more in front of me. And I'm an avid reader. I mean, that's the only qualification I can call for. And we need some interlocution, because historians, like all academics, write for other academics. And that is one confession that they make. So people need to know, especially in troubled times, what on earth are the facts. Because we are moving on towards an imagined history, and we're constructing a $1 billion museum on history as was imagined, as should have happened according to a particular community. Jayok, coming to this felicitation and this honor, as I said, I'm deeply honored as an outsider, and also honored because if you look back later on, to be in the presence of the three living legends, they are all institutions, Romila Thapar, Irfan Habib, Professor Chaudhuri. These are the living institutions. We have, mercifully, a lot of worthy successors to follow, but to be in their presence and to partake of their wisdom as they move along, as they keep producing even at this age. I had a longish paper published by Professor Irfan Habib, and I remember that the interchange between the author and the editor was the longest that I can ever remember. I think we exchanged 22 letters, emails, and that is the type of scrutiny That is the type of scrutiny on facts. Professor Chaudhuri, I think, beats Professor Irfan Habib. I can give you that on first-hand knowledge. Now, what had happened was, in our case, so some of us who had almost decided to come to academics, we were pushed back by 2 years. 2-year MA was pushed back by 2 years and everything, so we decided to sit for the IAS, and one never realized that somebody made a mistake, we got in, and after that, no change. Now, the realization of having entered into a mentally debilitating profession meant that one had to find some solution, some intellectual nourishment to stay alive, and that is where comes in. And one did some other postgraduates later on. But people ask me about my relationship with Professor Chaudhuri. Well, part of it is deep respect and partaking of his writings, but there is a small parochial side also. Sir Shunchen. And that is, both of us belonged to one of the most difficult districts in Bengal that Bangladesh is also contemplating separating from itself, Chittagong. We both come from it. I'm very proud of it, and he is equally proud of it. There is no back foot, and so that is a bonding we have, and villages almost nearby. And though I have never heard him speak in this language that none in the hall would understand except me. The second link was when, after my MAs in sociology and history, I decided to come up with a PhD, and with a lot of effort managed to get some amount of paperwork done amidst fighting flood, fire, riots. And I decided that if anyone would accept me, I would first go to Professor Binay Chaudhuri. He said straight away, now this is one great characteristics of people of Chittagong, we can't speak around in circles. Not even the Buddhis of Chattogram. Nobody speaks around in circles. তারা যা বলার মুখের উপর বলে দেয়। তো ও বলটা এটা আমার সাবজেক্টই নয়। And sir, I fully admit this is not your subject because mine was pre-modern. Pre-modern subaltern society converting over to presentization and thereby changing the structure. He said, made it very clear that there is very little evidence. I said, that's why I've come to you. There is evidence, which Professor Tapan Rai Chaudhuri later proved and concurred, and evidence is there in untouchable material like the Mongol Kabdus, historical materials. Anyway, so that was a link, and I actually registered most unwillingly. He registered and got ahead and immediately moved on. Now for permission to take study leave. The government of West Bengal behaved in a manner as if it would collapse if I'd left for 2 years. It behaved. I mean, it has its own strange way of behaving, though it had allowed about half a dozen of my colleagues to move. Half a dozen. In fact, some did this before leaving. And I went and finally went to the last court of appeal. Uni bollen je eki hocche tui jao. Tami giye I went to Jyoti Babu and finally made my thing and said, sir, please, apni amake 2 bochor jote. So he lifted his head and said, আপনারা তো পড়াশোনা করিয়ে আসেন, তাহলে মানে এটা একটু বেশি, আর একটা এই পড়াশোনাটা আমি করিনি। He lifted his head, put his pen down and said, তা বেশ, রিটায়ারমেন্টের পরে করে নেবেন। So there goes my thing, and I'll not forget. In spite of that, I did underground work for months and years until I was kicked around between the center and the state and the center, fighting with everyone. Now, his books that influenced, of course, I don't know whether you have read certain lesser known works. He has an excellent piece of, I think, 70 pages on vested property. Vested property in Bangladesh. It's a classic work of about 70 pages that goes into some of the fundamentals of property laws as of now and how relationships changed. So we went on with this thing, and I never left him, despite the fact that I was rejected from this side and rejected from that side. I hung on and continued our relationship for the next 30 plus years, and partook of Triptidi's hospitality. In fact, one of the days, since I was not his direct student and never very given to sobriety, once asked him whether there is any picture of Jamai Shoshti in that house. 5 sisters married to 5 great historians, whether there is any picture of a Jamai Shoshti. I mean, that would make real historical document. So that he, of course, laughed away. Now the issue that I would pose before scholars and historians, much better read than me, is the very issue of, we have with us, especially this book, this is 909 pages. And he has always insisted that you keep your health in good order. I believe from very reliable sources, because I never woke up at that time, that he gets up at 4 o'clock and then starts his morning walk. 4 o'clock is when I go out to sleep anyway. So he gets up at 4 o'clock, then goes off for his morning walk, comes back, and then sits at the desk till 1 o'clock. After which, again, the second round begins. Such discipline. How many of us, even professors and scholars, can bring in this amount of discipline? And if you interrupt him that time, there was a standard answer. Ami ekhon byasto. Ami ekhon byasto, parbo na. So people, we have all, right? That discipline is what goes into it. But I would pose a little question and a little puzzle before historians who still have time, that we have almost a complete, authentic documentation of agrarian relationship and land as a source of property, economic wealth, and strata, social structure, for a period of about 120 years. Okay? He has firmly got the records, and if Professor Binay Chaudhuri has done it, there is no record that is missed out. Okay. Having said that, we have also witnessed in the next 100 years, a gradual shift. When I entered the IAS in 1975, the first thing that we had to do was to go in for settlement operations. And I don't know whether you know these things, we had to pull something called Gunter chain and theodolite, take measurements and do it ourselves. So important was land to the structure of the state. So important was land as a contributor to state revenues. And so low has it sunk as a determinant of the present structure, at least of revenue. From about 30-35%, it's come to something like 3 to 5%, that's all. So the shift that took place between land as a pillar of the late colonial, mid-colonial state and the post-colonial state, to where globalization and commodification become the motivating factors and new classes arise, is a period worth studying. How the entire shift took place. So, and he has also predicted it in his work on the commercialization of agriculture, 1859 to 1885. This book has a revised version of it, which itself runs into 90 pages or 100 pages. Now, so we have his work, and we have also the factual position of contemporary history when you see that though land has lost its importance in the state affairs of men, agriculture has not, but those are different questions. I was very, very pleasantly surprised to see that the book is dedicated to Triptidi. That is really a sentimental thing. And I won't tell you today much more about the new museum that is coming up in Delhi, as I have written, on a fictional basis. Whatever historical and archaeological evidence we have is there documented and kept in the major museums. I had the fortune of working with them for about 15 years. But here is this project that's coming up called Yuge Museum. And I'm really apprehensive as to what Yug, whether we get back into Dapur Yug, Treta Yug, I don't know what they're talking about. Whether you see Ram walking next to a dinosaur, I have no idea what exactly they're up to, but we need to. One last word. Sir had once expressed his dismay at the condition of the Imperial Secretariat Library, or the Secretariat Library as it is called. I can give you one good news to all scholars here. I made a visit recently to Writers' Building, which is a Bhut Bangla. So, Writers' Building, ground floor. Sir, do you remember that work you had written about, আপনি লিখেছিলেন যে সেক্রেটারিয়েট লাইব্রেরিটা কিরকমভাবে নষ্ট হয়ে যাচ্ছে, Writers' Building Secretariat. It has been surprisingly done up very well. The question is, সিপাহীদের পাশ থেকে কি করে ঢুকতে হবে, ওটা পরে দেখা যাবে. But if you can, it's there on the ground floor, and I can assure you that it has been brought back to its past glory with a lot of additional lighting, seating, and other facilities. I go there quite regularly. Sir, এটা বলেছিলেন প্রায় 20 বছর আগে। 20 বছর আগে আপনি সেক্রেটারিয়েট লাইব্রেরির কথা বলেছিলেন। সেই সেক্রেটারিয়েট লাইব্রেরি, that is one of the very few good news we have to give in an otherwise depressing times. স্যার, আপনি আমার প্রণাম নেবেন, আপনি আরও কাজ করে যান, আমাদের আরও শেখান কীভাবে সিনসিয়ারলি কাজ করতে হয়। নমস্কার।
Thank you, sir. The panel discussion was really an enlightening session on history and the historian's craft. But how has Professor Chaudhuri has regarded outside the history circle? May I please request Professor Uma Chattopadhyay to take us through a short journey which will help us understand Professor Binay Bhushan Chaudhuri, the man beyond history.
নমস্কার, প্রণাম স্যার আপনাকে। স্যার, আমি উমা বলছি। হ্যাঁ, আমার আন্তরিক একটা কথা আমার মনে হয় বাংলাতেই আপনাদের ভালো লাগবে, কারণ স্যারের সঙ্গে আমার ক্লাসরুম রিলেশন তো নয়, বিবাহ সম্পর্কিত হয়ে আমি স্যারের কাছে ওনার ছাত্রের স্ত্রী, অরুণ বন্দ্যোপাধ্যায়ের স্ত্রী আমি। কিন্তু ফ্রম দ্য ইয়ার 1982 I'm continuously observing sir. Not only sir, and also Triptidi. I came very near to them, may not be very physically, but emotionally. Sir and Triptidi, both of them are very much careful about me. How many miles I am traveling to attend my colleges, different colleges, Brahman, Bethune, etc., etc. And all the time, sir used to say to Arun, Uma has to leave, Uma has to lose so many hours from our academic journey. সত্যি বলছি, আমি যখনই এটা অরুণের মুখ থেকে শুনতাম, অরুণকে ফোন ধরেই বললেন, উমা চলে গেছে কলেজে? হ্যাঁ, অনেক সকালে। স্যার বলতেন 1.5 hours, 2 hours she will take to attend the college. ওহো অরুণ কী হবে, আমরা খুব হাসতাম। আমার কাছে এটা ভীষণ ইমোশনাল ব্যাপার এই জন্য যে আমাদের ছাত্রছাত্রীরা এবং আমরাও কত দূর দূরান্তে কলকাতা থেকে ঝাড়গ্রাম চলে গেছি, ঝাড়গ্রাম রাজ কলেজে পড়াতে। আমার কাছে বেথুন এবং ব্রেবন্ত কোনো ডিস্টেন্সই নয়, কিন্তু বাসে করে যাচ্ছি, ওই যে বাসে কর্নারে বসে থাকছি, ওই যে জার্নিটা 1.5 ঘন্টা লাগছে, আমার তো মনে হতো কিছুই না, আমি যেন মনে হচ্ছে এয়ারক্রাফটে যাচ্ছি। এটা হচ্ছে শুধু ভালোবাসার সম্পর্ক। অসম্ভব তাদের ছিল ট্রাস্ট আমার ওপরে। তৃপ্তিদি এবং স্যার দুজনকে আমার ওনাদের কথা মনে পড়লে দুজনকে একসঙ্গেই মনে পড়ে। যে ভালোবাসাটা, যে কিভাবে তাদের ভালোবাসা আমার কাছে পৌঁছে যেত, আনন্দের সঙ্গে তাদের কাছে পৌঁছতাম। অল্প অল্প সময়ে গিয়ে পৌঁছতাম, কারণ তো আপনারা সকলেই শুনলে স্যার ইজ ভেরি পার্টিকুলার অ্যাবাউট টাইম। গিয়ে এটা ওটা সেটা গল্প করে কাটানোর সময় নয়, কিন্তু গিয়েছি। পরেই ওনাদের আরেকটা আবদার আমার সাথে থাকতো, আজ ভাবতে বেশ একটু লজ্জারই বোধ হয়, যে আমাকে গান শোনাতে হবে, উমা গান শোনাবে। গিয়ে আমাকে সেই সময় আমি গিয়ে গান গাইতাম। তৃপ্তিদি আর বিনয়বাবু বসে আছেন, আমি গান গাইছি। এত খুশি হতেন। অরুণ আমায় বলতেন ওনারা ভীষণ রবীন্দ্রসঙ্গীত পছন্দ করেন। আমার অতুল প্রসাদ, পুরাতনী, কীর্তন এসব খুব ভালো লাগার জায়গা। রজনীকান্ত শুনতে চাইতেন। এ তো আমার পরম পাওয়া। আমার নিজের জগৎকে ক্রস করে আমি যে ইতিহাস জগতে বিচরণ করেছি, এবং সমস্ত ইতিহাস জগৎ যেন আমার কাছে একটা এক্সটেন্ডেড বড় ফ্যামিলি। আমার ফিলসফি ওয়ার্ল্ড তো আছে, এবং সেখানে এরম একজন অধ্যাপক আমার মাথায়, আমি যার শ্রীচরণে পদস্পর্শ যার করতে পারি, এরম একজন মানুষকে, আমার শিক্ষককে পেয়েছি আমি। পাশাপাশি অরুণেরও যে এরম মাস্টারমশাই, যিনি আমারও মাস্টারমশাই হয়েছেন, আমি পেয়েছি। তো বিশাল সৌভাগ্যবতী নিজেকে মনে করি। আমি সবসময় মনে করি আমি সৌভাগ্যবতী। এটা সৌভাগ্যের আরেকটা বিশেষ জায়গা যে আমি স্যারকে পেয়েছি, অসম্ভবভাবে পেয়েছি। তৃপ্তিদিকে পেয়েছি, দারুণভাবে পেয়েছি। আর ছোট্ট কথাটা বলে শেষ করি। ভালোবাসাটা আপনারা নিশ্চয়ই ইমোশনালি বুঝতে পারবেন কি ভালোবাসা। এটা আজকাল ভালোবাসা দেখি শুধু কাইন্ডস গিভিং ভালোবাসা না, শুধু দেওয়াদেবী চলছে। একটা করে অনুষ্ঠান হচ্ছে, কেক কাটা আর গিভিং গিফটস। কিন্তু এই ভালোবাসা, এই যে শ্রদ্ধা, আজকে তো অভিভূত হচ্ছি যে লিজেন্ডারি প্রফেসর স্কলার, হি সিটিং দেয়ার অ্যান্ড উই আর সেলিব্রেটিং উইথ দ্য বুক। এটা তো ভাবা যায়। ওর সম্বন্ধে ভালো কথা বলতে সুযোগ পেয়েছি। প্রাইমাসকে আমাদের অকুণ্ঠ আমরা শুভেচ্ছা জানাবো যে এইরকম একজন লেজেন্ডারি প্রফেসরের পাবলিকেশন তারা করছেন, এবং সেই সুবাদে আমরা এসে দুটো প্রাণের কথা বলতে পারছি, ওনার প্রতি আমাদের শ্রদ্ধা নিবেদন করতে পারছি। আর আমি ইতিহাস জগতের লোক না হয়ে উকি ঝুঁকি দিয়ে ইতিহাস বুঝেছি, শিখেছি, জেনেছি, আর শ্রদ্ধা করতে শিখেছি ওনাদেরকে, সকলকে। সেটা করেছি। এবং ছোট্ট ঘটনাটা বলে শেষ করি। আজকের অনুষ্ঠান আমাদের সাজানো হচ্ছিল যে প্রথমে একটা উদ্বোধনী সঙ্গীত থাকবে, শেষে আরেকটা উপসংহারের সঙ্গীত থাকবে। স্যার শুনেই মাত্র বলেছেন উমা গাইবে তো। আমায় অরুণ জিজ্ঞেস করলেন, তোমায় স্যার বলেছেন গাইবে? আমরা, তুমি আমায় ক্ষমা করো, এত বড় অডিয়েন্সের সামনে আমি তাছাড়া এখন শারীরিকভাবে ততটা পটু নই। না, একজন প্রফেশনাল কেউ গাইবেন, তুমি স্যারকে বলো, আমি একদিন বাড়িতে গিয়ে আবার গান শোনাবো। সেই মর্মে স্যার রাজি হয়েছেন। ঠিক আছে, আজকে আপনারা শেষের গানটাও শুনবেন। সেইটা শুনে আশা করি আপনাদের ভালো। স্যার একজন বোধহয় বলে, প্রফেসর চক্রবর্তী, দীপেশ চক্রবর্তী বললেন যে বিনয়ন আর ভূষণ, তো এমন মানুষটি যেটা আজকে আমাদের দেবেন সেইটা শেষ গান দিয়েই উপস্থাপনা হবে। সেটাই শেষ গানেরই কথা, সে কথাই হবে যেটা প্রফেসর চৌধুরী বলতে পারেন, আমরা সেটা শুনব। এই বলে আমি শুধু বলি, আমি আন্তরিক ভালোবাসা যে স্নেহ যা পেয়েছি, সে ঋণ আমার কোনো দিন শোধ করতে পারবো না। আমি যেন সেই ঋণের দায় বহন করে চলি এবং সুন্দর করে আরও কিছু বছর চলতে পারি, এইটাই বলি। আর আরেকটা কথা আমার বলা প্রয়োজন, আমি যেহেতু খুব ভালো মাস্টারমশাই পেয়েছি আমার দর্শন জীবনে, তাই আমি বিনয়বাবু অ্যাজ এ টিচার কীরম ভালো, এই কথাগুলো শুনতেও খুব ভালো লাগে ছাত্রদের মুখ থেকে। আর ছাত্ররা যারা, আমরাও দেখেছি ফিলসফিতে স্পেশাল লজিক তারাই নিয়েছেন যারা ভীষণ কট্টর মাস্টারমশাইকে পছন্দ করছেন তারা, এবং তার ক্লাসের সংখ্যা কম কিন্তু খুব বাছাই থাকবে। এখানেও শুনছি ইকোনমিক হিস্ট্রির সংখ্যা, প্রফেসর সরকার বলছিলেন যে সংখ্যা কম এবং ভীষণ যারা কঠিন সাবজেক্টটা যারা বুঝতে চাইবে, ভালো ছাত্ররা নেবে। এত মিল হতো ঘটনাগুলো শুনতে 1982 থেকে শুনছি এসব ঘটনা, বারে বারেই মুগ্ধ হয়েছি আর বারে বারেই মিলিয়ে দেখেছি ভালো শিক্ষকরা একই জাতের হন, ফলে আমি চিনতেও আমার কিছু অসুবিধা হয়নি। স্যার, আপনাকে আমার অন্তরের অন্তঃস্থল থেকে প্রণাম জানাই। আমি যেন আপনার দেখাওমায় থাকতে পারি স্যার, আমায় আশীর্বাদ করবেন। প্রণাম স্যার, সকলকে আমার অভিনন্দন।
Thank you, ma'am. I would now request Professor Arun Bandyopadhyay to raise the vote of thanks, please.
We now all know that it is a significant academic and emotional event that we have experienced in the last 1.5 hours. Indeed, the task of raising the vote of thanks, I consider that no special thanks are required for his students, his grand students, the large number of people that have attended here, because they have all come here with an emotional attachment. And we are all obliged. We are grateful that we have been able to be here, both in the audience as well as in the stage, to see this significant academic as well as emotional event. There are, of course, some videos, and I will particularly recognize all the persons, some of my friends and some are pretty senior ones. And they have actually done it very much with a short notice. They have done it. For example, Dipesh Chakraborty, when I requested Dipesh Chakraborty, he just told me that he is going to Germany and he will be returned in the end of July. So he has only 1 day's time. So I sent the list of contents and all these things, and he said a few words. With regard to Professor Irfan Habib, who is a senior to Professor Chaudhuri, it is Proshun who I wrote to him, and it is Proshun who went to Aligarh to get this thing, to get his video message, and Professor Habib personally had written me that I will fulfill your wish, that I will say a few words. But he actually, the video that you have seen, he very recently, in the last 2-3 weeks, he is very much indisposed. Indeed, the video that you have seen, even in the month of April and May, he was giving video messages to BBC, and he was standing there. But now actually, I heard it that he was not so well. But even then, he had got through these pages of the book and said very significant words. Shekhar, David Laden changing his now residence, even within that, and then Shomita Sen, and all others, of course. And but one very important thing I must mention, that here I have seen some of the contemporaries of Professor Chaudhuri. They are not his students. Some very old students, but for example, Umadi has come here. I just telephoned her a few days ago and sent the card. Maladi has come here, and Ronobir, and so many others. Actually, everybody has come here, and that is very, very heartening to us. And last of all, I should say that, and one very important thing, Professor Chaudhuri is a very, very different kind of person, because all along he was always saying that Jutika, you must mention Jutika, because Jutika was the copy editor, and Jutika Manseta, Jyotika Manseta was the copy editor, and she went through all the pages and very meticulously went through this book, and sometimes we are in correspondence, and last type of actually discussion were being done. And over and above all, of course, Ramakrishna Mission has given this hall to us, and grateful to the authorities of them. Sampurnananda ji, actually particularly I telephoned when this hall was not being available easily, then I telephoned Maladi also. And Maladi helped me to get this particular hall on this particular day. And of course the Primus people, how respectfully they have organized it. I have the occasion of digitally attend many of this book launch program, even organized by Primus in IIC and other places. But I think this particular book launch program is very much different. So you please recognize it, that the kind of emotion, the kind of detailed attention that Primus people, particularly, of course, Bhola Verma ji was there, but and of course Proshun is there, and Shanmitro and Bhaskar Ghoshal, all of them. And last of all, we are very much worried that whether Professor Chaudhuri would be able to sit here for altogether 2 hours. Altogether 2 hours. And indeed, Professor Chaudhuri thought that he will say a few words about some autobiographical thing about 15 minutes. Time and again he told me that 15 minutes time I shall get. But he took only 2 minutes. But somehow he did not actually share his autobiographical reminiscences about the making of the book, which we are actually getting it from separate interviews with him. And now the latest thing is this, and this is also his son Onomitro Bubai, who is actually looking, who was supposed to come here but he could not, but he's actually observing this particular session through this Google Meet program, and later on when this recorded program will be available in YouTube, he will see it. But he told me once that Baba should be always engaged with something. So actually we have decided that after this agrarian world, he will go to the tribal world. So the tribal world, the last 25 years, from 1985 to 2012, the Presidential Address of the Indian History Congress, that was the last one. So 14 articles have been selected. And of course, I hope that Samyukta will also help in this endeavor. And Sir is very much particular. Probably he will telephone me tomorrow when he will come to do that work. So he is a workaholic. And his son Bubai told me that as long as Baba is workaholic, he is living. So this actually is something that you also, I think, help us by giving any other kind of information or anything like this, so that Professor Chaudhuri can do it within 1 or 2 years. This second book, The Tribal World. And the tribal world is going to be very much different one, because in the peasant world you will not find any article on religion. And the tribal world begins with religion. So this is a different world, an anthropological study that actually he entered also in anthropological study from the late 1970s. I have seen him doing this. And his first article on tribal world came in 1985-86. And it went on up to 2012. Just think of a person that who is planning his life so well. And probably I get the question that I raised in the very beginning about the making of the work, that why he is silent over so many years. He is not silent. He is actually internally working. That is most important. I do not know what kind of song will be delivered. I hope that Professor Chaudhuri will like it. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. We have almost reached the end of the day's event, and there is no better way to end the day with a song. I would request Mohua ma'am to please do the honors.
हे था जे गान गाइते आशा আমার হয়নি সে গান গাওয়া আজও কেবলি সুর সাধা আমার কেবল গাইতে চাওয়া হেথা যে গান গাইতে গাইতে আশা আমার হয়নি সে গান গাওয়া আমার লাগে নাই সে সুর আমার বাঁধে নাই সে কথা শুধু প্রাণের মাঝখানে আছে গানের ব্যাকুলতা আজ ফোটে নাই সে ফুল শুধু বহেছে খাওয়া আমার হয়নি সে গান গাওয়া হেথা যে গান গাইতে আশা আমার হয়নি সে গান গাওয়া আমি দেখি নাই তার মুখ আমি শুনি নাই তার বাণী কেবল শুনি ক্ষণে ক্ষণে তাহার পায়ের ধ্বনি খানি আমার দ্বারের সম্মুখ দিয়ে সে জন করে আসা যাওয়া শুধু আসন পাতা হলো আমার সারাটা দিন ধরে শুধু আসন পাতা হলো আমার সারাটা দিন ধরে ঘরে হয়নি প্রদীপ জ্বালা তারে ডাকবো কেমন করে আছি পাবার আশা নিয়ে তারে হয়নি আমার পাওয়া আমার হয়নি সে গান গাওয়া হেথা যে গান গাইতে আশা আমার হয়নি সে গান গাওয়া নমস্কার
May I please request Dr. Prasun Chatterjee to felicitate Ms. Chakraborty. The book is on display outside. We are done with the program today. Thank you everyone for being here. And please join us for the high tea. Thank you.